Perfect. Okay, amazing. We're there in the screen. Hi, everyone, and welcome. We also have the participants in person. We thank you so much for being here early in the morning. I know that it's already like 10ish, but still really early on a Sunday. So thank you so much for being here. And we also have many people joining us online, as we all know that it's hybrid and we try to make it as accessible as possible. This is going to be also in YouTube and Facebook in case anybody wants to get back to it. But yes, welcome everyone to the session on role of youth in eliminating food insecurity, ending hunger, and water scarcity. Now, this isn't a very special panel for me, as we have delved into peace and security, things regarding youth involvement, things involved being climate, security, and mental health, many diverse topics. But in the specific for food and security, we have the honor to be here with Shananine and Lana, whom will I introduce later on. But they are so experienced in these topics, and they have so many important and so many interesting perspectives to share and to bring to the table. So yes, we have Shananine Calvillo, who is climate justice activist and indigenous Niwa descendant from Mexico, and she is part of Legaya as an NGO from Mexico. And we also have Lana, which tenant? Who is Senior UN Policy Manager for the Food Awareness Organization Provec International, and previously the Youth Vice Chair of Shifting the Sustainable Consumption Partners for the United Nations Food Systems Summit. Yes, and I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. Yes, so I'm Shirabe, and I will be the moderator. And let's get into it, and let's get into the conversation. Remember that at the end we will have the Q&A and the comment section in case you want to mention anything, you want to be part of the dialogue. You're really welcome. The idea is here to be a really open platform so that you can share your perspectives as well. But yes, I just want to start off by asking you girls, what is your journey? What is your story behind all of this? What experiences have you lived throughout the whole fight for addressing food insecurity, highlighting specific projects, specific inspiring stories that you have been involved throughout, and how that has shaped your understanding around these critical issues that may be normalized for the rest of us, but it's so important and so big around climate crisis and around the environmental emergency that we're living right now. If you know who was the
I can start, and I'll try to not make it too long, because when we talk about journeys, I feel like we can go into a lot of details and backgrounds, but I feel like for the main context that has impacted me, myself and my family are originally from Brazil, and then when I moved to the United States, I moved to Florida as well, so both areas that in different ways. Florida more with hurricanes that we are seeing now. In Brazil more with the fires and the agribusiness and the Amazon rainforest. You really see these issues of climate change and climate disaster and issues that are occurring now that you can't really get away from, that become pretty present in your life. So kind of how I got started was as a student. When I was pretty young, I started out volunteering in some causes, trying to see what I could do for the community. And kind of a turning point for me was when I discovered that you can work on policy and advocacy in a broader sense. So I discovered that there are organizations that don't only do direct volunteering in communities, but that you could work to change legislation, or you could work to change the way that a law is implemented across a country, a city, or across the world. And so that was kind of what started bringing me more into this path of engaging in international policy and with the UN, and going into these more high-level spaces was when I kind of had this moment. I discovered this organization near me where I was studying, and I was like, oh, I can do this a lot more broadly, and try to have a much larger impact. With one thing that I'm able to pass, I can impact maybe a lot larger than I could with my direct action as one person. And so with that, I started getting more involved in, it was an organization on food systems, particularly trying to address some of the worst issues in factory farming, industrial animal agriculture, agribusiness. We know that there's a lot of some of the worst practices in really concentrated, intensive industrial agriculture that is often hidden from our view, but it tends to happen a lot in countries like the US, very developed countries. And they also try to export that across the world and say, like, this is the most efficient way of doing this. But it's terrible for the environment, for pollution, all these things. And so that's how I ended up getting involved in that and learning about how that is connected to so many of these crises and problems that we try to solve. And over time, I've also connected that more into also youth engagement, learning that if I get involved in youth organizations, then I can also have a bit more of a say in leadership. Whereas if you go into large adult-led organizations that have existed for a long time, it's really hard to be able to make a new initiative or lead an organization. And when you get engaged with other young people, you can really move a lot faster through your own campaigns, your own leadership. And so started doing that as well. And particularly through the climate movement, I think that was such a powerful one for young people and for my generation, when we saw that people would really pay attention to us. When around like 2018, 2019, we started having youth climate strikes, it started getting so much momentum. And it really felt like, okay, maybe we can actually get people to care and to look at what we are doing and to pay attention. And within that, started specializing and saying, like, well, I also have this background in food systems that I can bring in and also talk more specifically about what we can do to make that system better, also for climate, for pollution, for clean air, for clean water, all of these other things. And so it feels like a long journey. And that's like some of the key points.
Thank you. Well, a round of applause. Yes, because I know that it's a long journey. So I just want to highlight some things that you mentioned that really resonated with what we're trying to also build here, and with I do not focus certainly in food systems, but I appreciate it because I know it's so hard to get into the agro industries, to get into the food systems, like the whole factory, the whole complexity of it whole, right? Because it involves so much. But you mentioned it really correctly and really well about how everything is connected. It's really inspiring to hear how you came from the school movement to the whole thing that we're experiencing right now from the climate youth movement, and how that has also led to other things regarding how it's better. You mentioned it really, really well too, to be among youth engagement initiatives, youth-led initiatives, rather than the big, we all know, senior white male predominantly dominated sectors, industries, but also NGOs that we may not be able to undergo under the leadership roles, right? As much as we want to. But just thank you so much, Nana. Shanna, if you want to share your story, share why you're here, why it's important to be here in this fight too.
Hmm. Yeah, I think I also wanted to share a little about the origin, like the background. For me, I think I also first started with like the workers movement and the students movement in like high school, when we were like in Mexico experiencing a lot of the students movement, like being mobilized after the murder of some teachers in the south of Mexico. But even before that, I didn't like was doing like a lot of activism like on site, because I was like younger than that. But what did happen is that in my community for a long time we were experiencing like the effects of the factory farms. So that's why I first decided to like become like stop eating meat, to like be more conscious about the way that the food is being grown, like the practices that are being displaced. So that was when I first started to like learning about it, and after being like mobilized with all these also youth like predominantly movements. It was when I started more to like learn about campaigning, about organizing, and after that I also learned about the youth climate movement. And at first in Mexico, it was like a little, I would say like classist at the time. Like there was a predominantly also more white youth at the movement, but there was an organization that was working a lot on like bridging the other social justice movements and the indigenous movements with the youth climate movement that is Legaya. So that is why I also joined them and I started like organizing with them. And they also knew more about the policy making, so I learned a lot about from that about how the whole international politics system works from other youth. So I think that over the journey, I have learned like I think the basic of like climate, social justice from like a lot of my elders in where I'm from, but also I have learned a lot from youth. And also, when I met Lana, I also learned a lot about how the NGO spaces work, and that is also how I met the organization that I'm working now with, that is the Stop Financing Factory Farming Coalition, that Legaya is also joining, that other organizations, youth organizations and indigenous organizations are joining. But yeah, what we do is now to advocate and with this old strength from the intersectional movements about the impacts of factory farming and how policymakers can address that through like policy reform, but also how can we advocate for that. And our main interest is also to understand how the international financial system works and how the finance from development banks and even private banks goes to these industries that are creating the crisis, like factory farming. Because still, I believe that now we might be in front of a transformation of the youth climate movement as well. Because I believe that if at some point it was conceived as something rather wide that was created by a youth in the European Union. Now it is being more recognized that it's an intersectional fight that is being fed by a lot of other movements that have always been there, but that we can now then be more connected to them and try to bridge all these narratives, because the climate crisis is not only about fossil fuels, but it's rather about a whole structure of how food is created, of how wealth is distributed. So yeah, I believe that that is one of the also hopes that I have for the future youth engagement, that for us to also be able to communicate how we are feeling things in a way that people can start to challenge the way they think, challenge the way they eat as well. So yeah, for us to also not be so, I would say, like eaten by the system through all these inequality structures, but that we rather are able to influence it in a way that is better for all of us.
Oh my god. Yes. And a round of applause for Shana too, please. I really, oh my god, it's so complex. You mentioned many things actually. The financial systems, how well this is distributed. Did you, as well? I do want to ask the audience. Do you think, or you're aware from where is your food produced from? What do you eat? What is the background of it? And after that, it's the whole process is from where, from what animal, from what factory, from what system is it all considered so that you can have that into your plate, right? Is thinking about that, as you mentioned it from the start of your engagement, what does it take, right? And you mentioned many things. I was writing all the highlighted points: mobilizing community, social justice, learnings and teachings from the elders, and also how other youth from the same movement can also teach you about, and you can also learn from. I think just mentioning this intergenerationality is so important because there has been also so many people, mainly from indigenous communities, that have so many knowledge around these things because they have been fighting for all of these topics and all of these so complex systems for so many years, not from the activism, from daily lives, right? And how this is intersectional. We're talking about food systems and the factory farming, but it involves so many more interconnections through the financial systems that perpetuate the complexity of the whole climate emergency right now, and how it also contributes to many, as we know, not only the suffering of the animals and the species, is it correct, a specific system that we all live into, but the whole unjust social systems that also get into the whole perpetration and oppression of the same vulnerable communities. But yes, now getting into the discussion on how we can better combat this hunger, how can we better combat factory farming and the whole thing about how unsustainable agri-food systems are still thriving in our world currently. What specifically challenges have you seen throughout the youth movement towards fighting these specific companies, these specific sectors, and how have you seen these obstacles being overcome? And what are your specific? What do you see in the whole agri-food system movement as for the hopes of what are the plans and how is everybody better organizing themselves to combat this?
Maybe I can start with some
Yes.
challenges. It really is difficult to combat this. I mean, we started at a disadvantage, right? Talking about looking at financing, for instance, like these industries already have so many paid lobbyists who are going into the government offices, into the meetings with representatives from the major ministries, into the climate change conference, and like having people work on setting out what their main message is and how they're going to perpetrate that message and make sure that what comes out is nothing against or even just addressing the issues and the emissions, and always having someone running after and trying to ask like any speaker who mentions it or any high level person who even just talks about how emissions heavy that is and how it impacts climate change and all these basic facts, to tell them, let's not cover that, let's not focus on that. And of course, we're very far off from that, right? And it's not just young people not having access to financing or not being in these paid roles. It's the whole movement and NGOs and groups that are trying to cover this issue. They also don't have anything close to the lobbyists, the paid people and money to spread this messaging and like bring up these points that the other side has. So that is already something that, I mean, how can you have as much money as a massive industry? And it's not only money, it's also connections. And having, you know, like such something that's so ingrained into our societies, into the status quo, that then we would have to be going in and challenging, whereas like they are already embedded there. Mm-hmm. And often, for instance, from governments, they'll even go in as part of the delegation, right? When we go to these major meetings, they'll come with like the government badges, with the countries. So you won't even necessarily know that, have numbers that like there are this many like agriculture industry, big meat, big dairy, these kinds of companies there, because they're there with the government itself. And it's easy for the government representatives to also want to protect their interests because it's their economy, right? Which goes back to these financial interests, which at the end of the day is one of the biggest predictor of what a country's standpoint is going to be, is like, is it in their economic interest? That we've seen over and over again. Oh, does that country want to make sure that we don't talk about the emissions from that sector? It's probably because they're getting a lot of money from that sector. And so it can be pretty difficult going into something that's so present there, and that even the youth movement is not talking about enough. Yes. I think Shanna really brought that up, Shannon, very well, that even our own space is not taking a strong stand on this. Mm-hmm. So we don't even have that working in our favor. You know, most of the time they'll say, like, it's very convenient for NGOs, for government, for all these other representatives in society, when they see a clear message from a group, like all young people, all NGOs, or just like across like stakeholders, rights holders are saying a clear message, then it becomes a lot easier for them to say, okay, this is not something that they disagree on. This is coming across the space. And we don't have that yet on any aspect of making a stance on the emissions, the pollution, the human rights abuses from this massive industry. And so I think it's when we go in and try to talk about this as individual people who have seen this and are trying to make sure that this is not lost in the work that needs to be done, we don't even have that working for us. So I think we do have a ways to go, and I'm hoping that we can at least, start acknowledging that and start building towards that.
Thank you so much, Lana. I do want to highlight a little bit. It's important to notice that it's true. We often face people that are masked by governments, that are supported by the same governments and the same the people that should be protecting us as citizens that are affected directly by these industries and affected by these companies, but instead are protecting their financial interests through these agri-food systems, right? And companies, big companies from the whole wealth system that we all know around capitalism, around this all so horrible. And well, I always I always feel really bad about the complexity and how bad it's for us as a system and for us as human beings, not even mentioning the government as a whole, but to revolve and to put profit over people, right? Always, which is a reality. And how we don't talk it a lot. It's not even sufficiently mentioned inside the climate movement and inside the youth environmental activists and advocacy that we all have. And it's important to start having these conversations into the table in a way that they are meaningful and in a way that we're learning. I mean, I mentioned it at the beginning. I only have the superficial and the statistical part of it, but you all know how it is to fight these people face to face. You all know how it is to be there, literally getting to know the people that are directly affected. So it's important to uplift and amplify these stories and the truths that come around us. But yes, thank you so much, Lana. If you want to share something, Shana, too.
Yeah, I think that also following on what Lana said, that I do think is a huge challenge is that we are not coordinated enough, not even in our messages that we're going to push forward. Because I believe that for a long time, the youth climate movement has relied a lot on demonizing a resource like fossil fuels by themselves rather than thinking about the whole system that is creating profit and creating destruction out of fossil fuels. But that happens across other industries as well. It's not only energy, the one that is causing the most emissions to the earth, but it's also food, it's also the agribusiness, it's also the mining industry. So I believe that for us to come with such at least in the food system, that we need to come with a strategy and a strong message, the same way that the other climate movement that is focused on energy is doing, because I believe that also I'm a plant-based advocate, but I also don't think that we should start dividing the food systems transformation movement in that way, because also people from the global south, people that are affected communities that are being threatened by the extraction of petroleum still use petroleum based energy. So it's I think it's not something that is because we all live in this system, we all face these contradictions. I also believe that we should make allies even in people that, or in communities that rely maybe on workers maybe that rely on factory farming for their livelihood, but that also want the factory farming industry to be transformed, or people, communities that rely on other types of farming, but that are also against the factory farms expansion. So I believe that in understanding more the common points that we have between movements is how we can actually create biggest movements as well. So yeah, I think that in a sense, that is also an opportunity that I see to start creating these common messages and to start having joint strategies to also address the industries in a sense that is helpful for the communities that are affected now by the pollution of these big factory farms or by the deforestation of those. But yeah, that we understand these constrictions that we have in between this system, but that we all play a role in it. Uh, a few days we had an action in front of BlackRock, and we were also thinking that BlackRock owns a lot of the industries in the world, and we're probably also contributing to it, like by just existing. But again, like how are we gonna address that contradiction in our everyday life, and how we're gonna bring that to our work in advocacy as well, to like what things are we going to say in those meeting rooms, or what kind of voices and people we're going to bring to these conversations. And I believe that if we already are here, like if we have an interest on the climate movement or on transforming things in this world, like in the least sense, we should start like thinking about how are we going to connect with other people that might not have that yet. So, and also how we're going to push it even forward. Like if we already have fossil fuels in the agreement document, how are we going to go beyond that? How are we going to mention the agribusiness, the factory farms, the critical minerals and the communities that is going to affect? So yeah, to start thinking about other possibilities for the world. That is also something that I have learned a lot from other movements in Mexico, the Zapatist movement, that they say that another world is possible because it's already created. Like they do it every day, so like other forms of living can also be created.
Oh my God. Thank you, Shana. And you also mentioned many, many important things. I do want to highlight and oh my God, I'm so it's so enriching because it's all interconnected, right? It encompasses and it englobes so many issues and so many interconnections from the whole systematic way, because we all know that it's the climate justice movement and our climate emergency that we're living right now, the environmental degradation crisis. It's not about trees only. It's not about a specific habitats, specific animals that are just dying, but it's so much more complex than that. And every part of the whole system, every sector, every factory, every government, every youth, every person that is integrated here in this society today, that it's part of the world. And if you want to like keep on continuing with the fights, you must play an active role, right? How are we connecting with others? We need to rethink that. How are we amplifying these fights? What are we bringing into the discussion? If it's relevant enough, if we're like literally touching the points that are needed to be touched in the terms of what is already really big and really popular, because I do agree that the whole climate movement has been going against around petroleum-based solutions and the whole energy sector system, because fossil fuels and the whole gas, and but it's way more than that, right? It's the whole the entire system sectors involving mining, involving agro businesses that contribute to the gas emissions, that contribute to the pollutions, and not only to the pollutions and the environmental degradation, but also in the social injustice that we live day by day, right? And the contradictions that we also live by maybe only existing, which we need to be aware, and we need to emphasize this as much as we need to, as much as it's uncomfortable to emphasize and address this, because we all need to be disrupted. We all need to rethink our ways of life and how we play a part in this together, right? And just to finish before we get into the commenting and question section, I do want to ask you, for the people that are only also, yeah, we have 200 people watching the live stream right now. So we will also invite you to take part of the conversation. But yes, Lana and Shanna, that's not pretty rhymes. What are your final thoughts, final messages for not only mainly the youth that is watching, but what would you tell them to also share in their communities, share in their networks, now that you have the opportunity, and now that we have this platform to let them know what to be civilized and what to echo? So yes, I don't know if
I can start.
yes.
I think, the last question we really talked about challenges, and so I do want to add on to that the work has already started, and we have already had some successes despite those challenges. It's not like we're starting from nothing, right? And we have found ways to work around that, around all of these difficulties. Like, for instance, we have learned how to be able to present the ideas, initiatives that we need to move forward as not being a threat, and being something that can rather be positive for governments, for climate change conferences, for businesses, for all these different actors that we need to convince. So we have been able to, for instance, a lot of young people have been able to change like the food that's served and that's procured or like purchased for their schools, their universities, for their communities. So like being able to start making that conversation and start making that direct change. And then in some of the larger spaces, we have been able to also, for instance, get some push through of like, there was some governments hesitating on covering certain aspects of food systems, and we were able to reframe it in a way that it passed through, like in the UN Food System Summit, for instance, and got a lot of young people behind it, which was a key factor in pushing through aspects that they were hesitant to cover, right? That like was not so much status quo. So we have started a lot of that work. I mean, even my colleague spoke on the stage of Global Citizen yesterday about food security and the importance in food systems issues. So like we have gotten strides. It's not gone nowhere, but at the same time, we'd love to have more people join us. And even if you can't be actively working on this as your main cause, just like stand with us, and also share about the importance of this in climate action, and for our societies and our communities. So a few ways that you can do that I'll just shout out. From the organization that I'm working for now, we have a UN Youth Board. Shannon is part of it. And we usually launch the applications near the end of the year. If not at COP, then by December. It's called the ProVeg UN Youth Board. And I love being able to work with the young people there and try and find opportunities, particularly in the UN policy space. And then I'll also mention Yango, if you're not already involved, the official youth representation for UN climate change. And they have a food and agriculture working group that puts forward the priorities, the statements and the desires of young people as part of their broader global youth statement. And I encourage you to get involved there as well, and happy to help anyone plug in if you're interested.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Anna. So many opportunities, so many initiatives that are already ongoing, and we need to share them so much more, because this is still, again, really invisible. We all know it, but yes, resharing the message and resharing and resonating, and echoing what you mentioned, Lana. Stand along the fight, even if it is not your main focus, even if it is not your main fight. We are all fighting in this indirectly, but even if it is not your field, please do support us, support each other, support the fight that they are bringing into the table, bringing into these so important decision-making processes and some like big stages, from the big stages to the small stages, to the fights from the streets, to the fights from the UN. Everywhere is important for you to support and for us to amplify and not be part of the other side of the narrative, but to get to know what involves the whole fight causes and the work that they are trying to bring to. But yes, thank you so much, Lena. It's important. And Shona?
Yeah, I think that also for another shout out for like people that are coming from indigenous communities, there's also the International Indigenous Youth Forum on Climate Change that is part of the IPO, like the indigenous organizations and people in the UNFCCC. So that for you that are part from a community, they can also join. And also from that to learn and recognize that I think that through food is one of the ways that we can connect with our land like most efficiently. because at least in my culture, like that is like a part of how we reproduce life by at itself, and also how we recognize the elements of the environment, like the seasons, like everything that grows natively. So I believe that that is something also that one can do like in a individual and community level, like to not only rethink about how do we the food that we eat comes from, but also how can we have a different relation to food as well, and to this whole agri food system as well. So yeah, I believe that that is an opportunity that we can all take, and also to engage more in these conversations, to talk about it openly, to not be able to also be able to like try new things. I believe that for a long time these industries have been really um, displacing maybe like our cultural foods, or like imposing some way of eating or some way of being, because that's also like a way in which these systems of domination like reproduce. So also to understand that food can not only be like a threat or like a polluting system, but that it can also become a part of how we reproduce our culture, how we connect with others, because I believe that's also what it is. Like food is also cultural, and it's a part of how we are going to transform our societies as well.
Yes. Let us be part of the food transformation transition from the agribusinesses to the cultural, to the ground grassroots, and the ground that's evolving throughout so many generations, right? Food has been so important and so essential for our cultures, for our connections as persons, and for our essential part of us literally living, right? And that is why it's so important to have this conversation about one of the most important things that englobes our daily lives, right? And rethink our relation with food. You mentioned it really, really well, Shannon. It's all about questioning all of our ways of living, but food is a so important thing because it contributes to so many emissions. If it's not well rethinking and we perpetuate the same companies, we go into the same super like big international and transnational supermarkets, uh, like to start engaging with the local communities, to start engaging with the local producers, to know and get to share their stories, to share their fights too, and how we can better work with each other so that we all together can get into letting down and like literally combating and not like transitioning out these so awful factory farming and agribusinesses industries. But yes, thank you so much, and we will get into the Q&A and commenting section so that everybody can participate too. First of all, for the people here in person, in case you have any comment, any question in a specific, you are welcome to raise your hand. Yes.
Thank you guys.
If you want to introduce yourself too.
My name is Dira Topo. I'm the executive director of Channels of Hope. So, Channels of Hope is a non-profit organization that focuses on education, clean water sanitation in Haiti, the US, and in Africa. I actually appreciate all the challenges that you really stress out over you guys, because many times we have big entities and corporations that really try to fight as much as they can to be able to stop whatever good result that we need for the larger population, basically on self-interest. So with everybody listening to you and the audience, I agree you guys are identify the challenge. But what are some of the way you guys think we can be able to go around facing those big entities and institutions?
Whoever wants to start.
I can start. Thank you. Yes, I feel like I started saying that, we've been able to do some things, but not directly how we have been able to um, directly counteract some of those challenges. And it is difficult, but I think some of the ways we have worked on doing that is through using official channels, such as the official youth representation in processes, and really being present there and following and engaging sometimes more than the business representatives. So, for instance, in the food and agriculture space, we have our own agriculture negotiations process under UN Climate Change or UNFCCC. And we have, as young people, honestly, been a lot more present than the businesses there. So what that means is like following every session, checking, where the negotiations are at, talking with the negotiators, sending them what we want to go through in their proposals and their agreements, and just being really proactive and really engaged there. And yes, the businesses also do have their own official representation. Aside from that, they're through the governments too. But I think that when we organize and we really think about all the possibilities of how can we make our voice heard the most and resonated the most. So, trying to make the most relevant suggestions that they can really use the next day in their language. And also thinking about, how can we speak and bring what we need to say there that can really impact the most at the most relevant time. Aspects like that, I think the organizing and the strategy can sometimes help us to get ahead even in those challenging situations.
Thank you.
Yeah, I believe that that is also one of the reasons why it's important to be at these spaces, to know what is being negotiated and to also be able to have like narrative interventions on how it is, how are things being said and how do we want them to actually be. So that's like an important point to understand then how the policy making spaces work. But I think that also another resource that is sometimes mostly used by communities that are being affected directly is to also have like trials or do like demands to the companies and to ask for accountability directly through like national law. So I think that's also like now also with the rise of nature mobilizations, there's also like more ways in how communities can take like these industries to court. But also there are other ways on mobilizing as movements as well, to like boycott these companies or to like shame them like publicly for what are they doing. So I do think that as well, another important part is how we are using like the attention that the climate movement has to bring all these issues to light and to be able to also push these messages that maybe in different spaces it can be done, and then we can all come together to fight for the same thing, but like in different ways. So yeah.
Yes, thank you. And I do want to emphasize some before we end. There is like really interesting comments, for example, from Fatma Sara. There, she mentions that in Africa, particularly in the Saharan area, the implication of women will be more significant because they produce a majority of food cultures that contribute to home consumption, so to reduce hunger and promote food security. Yes, I did wanted to emphasize this, and for the comments and the questions that we have online too, the intersection of women is so important too in the agriculture and the sectors and everything. We may be going and going all along for why, and you mentioned it, accountability, the intersection of women here, everyone taking part and how they are involved in a specific vulnerable communities, the indigenous communities that have had their own like ways of agri-food systems from the traditional and the native like ways of living. Sorry. So yes, and there's a last question, but I do want to pose it like openly because we do have to finish. There's the what skills, and this is from Rasha Hayat Narana. I hope I pronounce it well. What skills and knowledge do young people need to effectively contribute to sustainable food systems? And with these closing remarks, if you in 1 minute each can like finish and close it however you want.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Oh yes.
I would like to tell something
Oh, if you don't mind.
because I can you speak French, please? Because my English is not good. So I work in the agricultural sector in my country. I help the youth to do the entrepreneurship in the agriculture. So my question is what are, in your opinion, the main levels that young people can activate to overcome the obstacles
Mhm.
to access to water and food resource in the most vulnerable communities.
Okay, that's a very good question. If you want to address it too and finish with the closing remarks. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I think maybe one of the most powerful aspects in terms of some of the last points that were brought up is that we don't need to wait on governments, on these high level decision makers, on the approval from businesses, or for the large industry to make the change happen in our own communities, right? Like we can go in and we don't need all of these people to agree with us in order to start making our own change or our own implementation, such as, like urban agriculture or trying to promote like growing your own food, like getting engaged in some of these small ways and getting other young people involved. There are many things that you can do where we don't need these processes to move forward, and you can start bringing the change in your own communities. I think I will quickly say something a little more controversial also,
No.
which is on the policy side and in terms of like that more high level negotiations, we might feel a lot of ways that we are saying here in youth spaces and with other young people. But oftentimes, if you want like governments, businesses, the high level decision makers to continue talking with you, it can be helpful to sometimes pick the moments where you say that and where you push that forward, so that sometimes you can stay in the system a bit longer and have them not feel like, you might cause like a big scene or be too difficult to have in their space. And if you pick the moment where you say that, where you're able to already get far enough into their tables, into their spaces, then sometimes that can be more strategic. If you make them feel like they can bring you along and they will not threaten them until you have a strategic moment to do that.
Until you threaten them. Yes. Thank you, Lena.
Yeah, I think that's also a great skill to like be able to influence these spaces. But also, I would say that another one will be to like connect in between movements, to like not focus a lot or like put all your hopes in one space, but actually be able to like go in between them and be able to mobilize with young people. And I think what she said as well, like her initiative is example of that, of how we can territorialize all this, to also not get too carried on like the global spaces, but also remember that what we want to change is like all reality in our territories with our people. So that is also really important to like not forget what you're doing, the things that you're doing, and to be able to stay honest with that. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lana and Shananin. It was fun. And with that, we finish it and we close it and we